Today I'll talk about Express.js. Express.js is a library that you can install in the Node.js ecosystem that is JavaScript server-side. So this is the website if you want to know more about it, expressjs.com. Now, of course, you're going to need Node.js npm, the Node Package Manager, so we can install Express. Here's the website, nodejs.org. So make sure you have that. And yeah, so just give an overview. Why Express? Well, so when you have a website, web application today, you go in a browser, you receive a web page back, right? You have a HTML document of some CSS, some JavaScript. That is served by a server. There's something that's giving you back all that stuff. So Express.js is a way for us to build that kind of server. It's called an HTTP server. You know how you communicate in the browser usually through HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And then we make a request for a resource and we get back a response. Express makes it very easy for us to create that server. Of course, we could have used the server-side JavaScript Node.js and wrote everything from scratch using the HTTP module, but that's not very convenient. So what we do is we usually use a wrapper or an abstraction on top of the built-in modules, and one of them is Express. Of course, there are other ones like popular today, I don't know, Nest.js might be a choice, but Express probably the most straightforward way and historically is very popular. And it's very simple to do. So if you come from background to other programming languages, if you use Ruby, this is like the Sinatra of Node.js. All right, so let's get started. First, I need to go to a terminal and create a directory for my project. So I'm going to share my command prompt here. I'm using Windows right now. So I'm in a directory here, and I'm just going to create another one to host my project. So if I'm on the command line, I can do mkdir. This command works for any platform. And if you don't like doing command line, just go on your File Explorer or Finder in Mac or whatever, and right-click and new folder. Anyway, I'm going to call it Introduction to Express, separated by a dash, all lowercase. Now I'm going to change to that directory of the command cd space Introduction to Express. That command is also the same in any platform, Windows, Mac, Linux. Okay, right now I don't have any files, so what I got to do is first initialize this as an npm project so that I can install packages from the npm, the Node Package Manager registry. And to do that, we can use the npm command. If you install Node.js on their website, you should already have the npm command as well. Space init. So all this command will do is create a file called package.json. And it asks a few questions. If you want to answer them, it's up to you. I'll just press enter all the way. I can always change this later. Enter all the way and say yes, it's okay. And I'm going to open this directory in my text editor. That's Visual Studio Code. So my command here is code space dot. Dot means the current directory. And all that that npm init command did was create the file package.json with the information that was filled in as we pressed enter. So let me share my Visual Studio Code screen here. Of course, you can use any text editor or IDE of your choice. Doesn't matter. Here's my window for a Visual Studio Code. I see there's a file that was generated by npm init package.json. It's just a file in a format called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. And we have like pretty much it's a property and value. And the value themselves can be strings or it can be as an object like this one. In any case, those are all the values that were input when we type npm init. Now, if you'd like, I can go back to my terminal to install Express as a dependency, or I can do it from my IDE if I press Control Backtick, that's also an option, so I don't have to keep switching back and forth the shared screen with you. In any case, I have a PowerShell instance open here in my Visual Studio Code, and you can do it in your terminal, whatever it is. I'm going to do npm space install space express. So this is the command to pull or download third-party code from the npm registry. So Express was written, the code is already written by somebody else. All we're doing is bringing that code to our project. So if you notice here in the File Explorer bar, I have a node modules directory. That's where all the packages installed by npm go. In this case, I'm going to look for Express. See, this is the one that it installed. It downloaded that source code and it's now available here. So you can see the source code there. So that means we are leveraging the work of another person, right? We don't want to start from scratch. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to work with what somebody else already wrote. So we're going to leverage this code for the Express library. In any case, that's how you know it's been installed. You've noticed there's always other directories, and that's because the Express in turn, if you look at its package.json, it has a dependencies property that has a lot of other packages. So Express by itself also depends on other people's work. Now let me collapse everything, go back to package.json for our own project. You're going to see Express has been added to the object. That's the value for the dependencies property here. And the right-hand side means the version that was installed. Okay, so this means this caret means any minor or patch version. Minor meaning the middle number, and patch the right-hand side number. So that would be 4 point something, point something. But it doesn't allow 5 because that will be probably a major version change. Usually has breaking changes, so you don't want to have it automatically install it that way. Okay, so we got the Express there. Finally, let's right-click here, new file. I'm going to create a new file in the root of the project. I'll call it index.js, or you can call it server.js, whatever. So first, in Node.js, we're using Node.js here. So that means JavaScript server side. So if I want to pull or use a module that was installed by npm, I have to use require. And then parentheses, the name of the module being Express. Now I can put this in a variable. I usually call the same name as the module, so I'll call it Express. Now, if you want semicolon for JavaScript, and while I'm at that, I have my extensions enabled. I don't want that auto completion because we're beginners here, so I'm going to disable that while I'm doing that. One moment, disable that. There you go. Let me see if I disable this too. All right, going back to what we were doing. So we have the variable express, so we just call it as a function, and that will return what's called a usually application. And we usually call it app, the variable name, to store that. And finally, you can define stuff, our endpoints or routes and stuff, but I'm not going to do that right now. I just want to power up the server. To do that, I call the function that belongs to app called listen, and it requires us to say, okay, I'm listening, what's the port? So I can put the port in a variable here, const port. Let's usually 3000 is a very common one. And I can use the variable there. And if I do it this way, save it. And then in my terminal, I'm going to do, to run this script, I say node space index.js. Now you notice nothing's happening, but it's actually running the server. You see if there's no prompt. So if I press Control C, that sends the interrupt signal. That will stop. Okay, Control C. Don't forget, you want to stop, Control C. Send the interrupt. Anyway, that's not very user-friendly or developer-friendly, so we want to add a second argument to listen, and that's a function. I can use the arrow function or the normal function. Doesn't matter. So this is the callback function that's called immediately after the server is run. So we can say, okay, let's do a console.log and say like this. I'm going to use a backtick because I interpolate. Server is running. Wow, this is autocompleting. I don't want this because we're beginners, but whatever. So server is running on HTTP. Don't put S. That's a common problem. Localhost is usually alias to 127.0.0.1. and colon the port. The port comes from the variable here. So I'm interpolating, meaning I'm going to take the value from port and replace it here. So imagine this became like that. That's thanks to the backtick that I use here. If you use like single quote, it doesn't work. You need to use the backtick. That's the character next to the on the tilde key. If it's also next to the keyboard, number 1. Anyway, on American keyboard. So we got that. Save it. Now let me put node index.js again and say server's running on that address. What's nice about putting the HTTP address here is I can hold control and click to follow the link, at least on Visual Studio Code. And any terminal, I think it happens. So I'm gonna open that in the browser. So let's do share the browser here. HTTP localhost 3000. And if you see, it put localhost 3000 there with HTTP. You should see cannot get slash. That means the server is actually running. If you don't see anything like something is broken or whatever, cannot connect, that means it's not running. The reason saying cannot get slash is because the server hasn't been programmed to understand your request to the slash or root endpoint. How's everybody doing so far? Let me know if you have trouble running the server. All right, so I'll go on here. Let's see. Oops. One moment. Here's the, going back to Visual Studio Code. Let's make it exciting and add an endpoint, meaning, okay, if I go to HTTP localhost 3000 slash, I want to see a message hello. So hello world. To do that, I just call on the app object dot, and then I can use the HTTP method. Remember, HTTP, you need a method. Is it get? Is it post? And there are other ones, but usually it's get or post. So I want to do a get. That's the method when we go on the browser and you type anything in the address bar, press enter. That's a get request to that endpoint. When I say endpoint, it's like the URL or address, whatever, route, whatever you want to call it. Okay, call it, there's 2 arguments. The first is the path. Okay, we're gonna be, relative to this server, it's gonna be slash, meaning the root one. So when I go http colon slash slash localhost colon 3000 slash slash being optional, it's gonna go here. Now it's gonna call this function, that's the second argument. And this function gets the argument rec and res, the 2 The first for the request, the second for the response. You can call them whatever you want. I usually call them REQ and the other one res. Okay, now to reply something back, so when I hit slash, right, it's gonna call this function. And I need to give back a response because I'm being asked for something. Hey, server, I need a resource. I need something. Can you give me back the response? So we do that through the response object, res.send. That's the most generic way of doing it. And you can send whatever. If you don't want to send anything in the reply, anybody, just send without any arguments. If you want to send a text, put a string here and say hello world, for example. Now this is going to be sent as plain text. You can use single double quotes, it doesn't matter, or even backtick. Okay, now I made a change to my code here, but my server won't automatically adopt those changes. So we got to go here to terminal, press Control C to interrupt and shut it down, and then restart it, typing the same command again, node index.js. Okay, now going back to the browser. If I refresh or go to the same root route, I should see hello world. Let me increase the size of the font so you can see better. Okay, hello world's there. Now I want to press F12 to open DevTools. Now I'm using Firefox, but it's usually the same in other browsers, Chromium based. Yeah, I'm going to go to the network tab because I want to monitor this request. Click that. I'm going to reload the page. I make sure the filter's collected to all there. And I can see here this row is for the request to slash. And here's how I can see the details of this get request. I can see it's get because you see the get verb here, and then the address or URL. And the status code for this response was 200 OK, and the version of HTTP was 1.1, and so on. So we also get what are called request headers, response headers in HTTP. Request headers meaning something we send metadata or additional information we send to the server. These are all the pairs of property and value, the property being the name of the header and the value, whatever. So you have a lot of metadata here. In any case, there's also the server replies with something, and it also has headers. And one of them is interesting as x powered by, which says express value. This means, okay, the server is sending back a response with some metadata in the header x powered by to let us know the server is an Express.js server. In any case, this is how you debug, in a way, the response there. And you can even click this response tab. It shows you the actual, if you click raw, is the raw response body, the text hello world. And I think if I go back to headers, the response content type here is text. Oh, it's setting to text HTML. Interesting. Not plain text. It's probably Express doing that by default. Okay, so content type is a header that says, okay, we send you back something, and that something is of the type text HTML. It's supposed to be an HTML page. And the char set is the character set. We usually use UTF-8 Unicode, the codification of the characters. Okay, I'm gonna close the dev tools. How is everybody doing so far? Got hello world. Was able to analyze the request and response of dev tools. Okay, hope everybody's doing well. Let's go on. Going back to the code. Now this is nice. What if I want to have this route or endpoint at slash hello dash world instead of the root? Well, I could just change the first argument to get here and say hello dash world. So when I go to localhost slash 3000 slash hello dash world, it will go to this route. So if I go save that, restart my server, Control C, and issue the same command again. If I refresh, it's not going to work, right? So it's going to get slash because I changed the endpoint path. So now I have to say slash hello dash world, and it will hit the same hello world. Okay, so you can have any custom path you want. Cool. Now, like I said, going back here, introduction. We can also send HTML here. So if you want to send some HTML page, you can say HTML tag here, and then body, and hello world in a paragraph. How about that? P tag there. Close the P tag, close the body, close the HTML. Now, usually I explicitly like to add that I'm sending HTML to the user who requests this. So we can set the content of a header. Okay, if I just say res.set, that's one way. There's two ways, a set or a set header. Okay, if you do set, we can pass the name of the header, content type, and then second argument, okay, what's the value? Text slash HTML. So this is setting a header. So you can set any HTTP header here by setting the first name being the first argument being the name of the header and the second the value. And then make sure to do that before you issue the send command because you cannot do it afterward, okay? Make sure before the send. Okay, let's save that and kill the server, run it again. Let's see if that's working. Refresh. Like visually is the same, but let me right click and view page source. I can see HTML here. See the tags are there. And if I close this and open the DevTools with the F12 where you can right click inspect, click on the inspector tab on Firefox or elements tab on Chromium based to see the DOM, the document object model here. I can see there's HTML tag, body, and P hello world like we did. Okay, so you can make a HTTP server to send back HTML. Okay, let's go back. That's nice. How about we make another one? Let's say we do. So you can proceed to make any other endpoint by just calling app dot whatever, app dot get, app dot post, if you want to do a post. So you could do app dot get slash another endpoint dash endpoint. Add the second argument as a function with parameters rec and res for request and response respectively. Oops, no arrow there. And then you can just do whatever, do some processing if you need, and then send back a response. It's all gonna boil down to you have to do res.send. In the end, you gotta send something back. Now, this something could come from other place. You can make a variable here, store some value, process, look up in the database. That's what we typically do, right? When we get a request for a resource, we look up somewhere like a database to see if a resource exists. If it exists, I'll retrieve the information and send back to the user. Let's say we have some information, Lorem ipsum here, in a variable. I can send it back here by putting a variable there. And it should send it as well. Now I keep killing the server and restarting it. And go into the browser. Let's try slash another endpoint with a dash between. I get lorem ipsum. That was the value from the variable. Now that's you can keep going like that and build as many routes as you want. Now, let's see. Another thing I want to show is, okay, we don't have to hard code HTML here. Obviously, this is not how we do it. It's not the good way. So usually you can have a folder here. If you create public folder, we can move this HTML from hello world to a file called hello-world.html. Let's do that. I'm going to take this content here, copy and paste to hello world.html. If you want to format like that, I can do it. I did it with Control-Shift-P, format document. That's a Visual Studio function. You can do that. Anyway, this is the content. It's in a file now. So how can we send content from a file? Well, we had to read the file first and then send the content. Now to read it in Node.js, first we need to leverage the module fs. So require at the top fs, under quotes, put in a variable, I just call it the same name as the module, fs. And then here, before we send anything, we gotta read the file. So to read the file, we're gonna do call fs dot read file. Now there's different ways to read the file. There's the synchronous version, there's the asynchronous, and there's the promise version. Fs promises dot read file is another way. I'll do the synchronous version for the sake of simplicity, okay? So I don't have to deal with promises. So, okay, what's this function will read a file if you give the argument first being the, okay, what's the path? Well, I'm just gonna say public slash hello dash world.html. I'm not gonna care about like Windows path, Linux path right now, just and building path using the path module. Just do it like that. Okay, now second option I like to add always the encoding, I can pass an object with the encoding property being UTF-8, -8 or 8, doesn't matter. Same thing. Now, the reason I always do this is so we don't forget, because I've had problems when I worked in production for a company where it was not applying the encoding correctly when reading files, so that caused a lot of problems. So I always make sure to put encoding when I write or read files to be UTF-8 explicitly. Okay, when we do this, it's going to return a string with the content of the file. We can store that in a variable if you wish. Let me call the variable const file content. And then we can leverage that and use that to send here, file content. Of course, you could put this already there, but doesn't matter. I can put in a variable as an intermediate step. Okay, so we're going to read the file. The file goes to the variable as a string, and then finally we send that string to the client, which is the browser. Now, before I restart and do my thing again, let me just show you a way you can no longer have to keep shutting down the server for every change that you make in the source code. Now, I can install a package called nodemon, so I can do npm install. Now I'm going to do --save-dev nodemon like that. The reason I put --save-dev is so it's going to be installed under dev dependencies instead of dependencies in package.json. Because usually nodemon is not necessary for production. When we run the app production, we don't want to be restarting for every change. So don't use that in production. It's just for development. So nodemon is installed. And we can go here and say npx nodemon index.js. Now, the reason I use npx is because it will look for nodemon in the node modules .bin nodemon here. I'm using Windows, so I should use cmd. So this is the command for nodemon. So if I don't want to use npx, I would have to specify the whole path, like /node modules /bin /nodemon, like that. And it will run nodemon. Now, if I don't want to type the whole path, just put npx there, and it will look for that in the node modules directory. Okay, this is nice, but usually people will add to the package.json under scripts. You can add the start or dev or whatever you want to call it. Let me add start here. And let's call it nodemon index.js. Notice when I do scripts here, I don't have to type npx because it's already going to know that's going to take for node modules. So if I do this, the reason I do that is just for convenience, so that instead of me typing npx nodemon index.js, I can just type npm start, and it should start it like that. Now, if you named your thing dev or something other than start, you have to say npm run, okay? npm run whatever you said. Okay, start is just a special case. Okay, so now nodemon's taking care of listening for changes in the file. So that means I can go here, my file, I can change something. Like maybe I'll say lorem ipsum, whatever. Save it. Watch the terminal here says nodemon is restarting due to changes. So it already restarted the server because it watched and noticed that you changed the content of the file. So that's what you want to use in development, because it's very tedious to have to keep killing the server every time you make a change. Killing and restarting. How everybody doing so far? Any questions? Okay, that's the tooling and what we got here. Let's test it out. Go into the browser. If I refresh this, you see whatever here. Yeah, whatever. Going back to hello world. You can see now hello world's here, and that's coming from the file. Right? If I go here and change the file and say hello world from file, save the file, go back to the browser, refresh, I still see from file. Okay, that's a step forward instead of us having to hard code the HTML. But still not so very good because, you know, if I look here, okay, what if I have so many pages, right? A website today has thousands of pages. Well, I'm not gonna make one endpoint for each like this. Imagine there's 1,000 pages. I have to 1,000 times do this. That's not good. So we don't want to do that. So what happens is if we were to write it from scratch, we would just programmatically read the file listing for the directive public and generate code that looks like this for every single file that I find. Obviously, we don't have to write that from scratch, so we will leverage what's called a middleware for that. The Express static middleware. So middleware is something that stands between the client making the request and your response. In the case of Express, say when I ask for a Hello World resource, it's gonna go through the pipeline in Express and eventually hits this function that returns the response. Now, this pipeline, we can inject something there. So we intercept, and that's called a middleware. So every time you try to access something that might be from like the public directory, we'll intercept, hey, they're trying to read a static HTML file, so we're gonna reply with all this code that we generate like this. Read the file and then set the content to HTML and send it. Now to use the middleware, all you have to do is say app.use and then pass the middleware function here. Now middleware function is just like the handler function here that we typically use, except we also use a third argument called next. That means whenever I'm done with the middleware processing, I call next so that it goes and continues in the pipeline to eventually reach the response handler function. So here we're going to pass that function, and that comes from express.static, and you got to call it like this. So express.static, you have to tell it the first argument, okay, what's the directory you want to listen for static files? That's public. And then you can say here, usually we want to add the options here, additional options to this middleware. One of them is the extensions, and you can read the information here. This is so you don't have to type in the route. When you say hello world.html, you don't have to say .html, can drop that extension. So if you say extensions like an array of a string HTML, that will make that happen. You see my Visual Studio Code gives some information about that here. You can read. Your IDE probably does that as well. Otherwise, you can always reference the docs. Let me show you. Go into the browser, go to expressjs.com. Here are the docs. You can look at the API reference. I'm using version 4, remember, to pick the right version. And you can look at the reference here. It's probably somewhere there's express dot static. You see it on the left-hand side, express static. And it tells you everything about that function. And these extensions is here, if you look. Set files, extension fallbacks, whatever. Okay, in any case, going back there to the Visual Studio Code. So let's see. Let's see here. So when I do that, let me comment out, or when I comment out code, it means the program ignores that. So I'm going to comment out the code for hello world here. See if it's going to work coming from public with the middleware. Now remember, NodeMon already restarted the app. So I can go back here and see if hello world is working still after I press Control R or Command R in Mac to refresh, or click this icon here. So it's still working. If I, for some reason, rename the file, let's test it out to see if it's really working. I'm going to try to break it. Go to public hello world. I'm going to rename it hello world 2.html. And let's see if it's really working. Now it says cannot get / hello world. See that? So it's working. So the middleware, right? When we do this call here, all it's doing is returning a function. Think of this whole thing here as returning a function that has rec, res, and next. And inside this function is doing that processing and then calling next to go forward with the pipeline. And that process is basically what we did here. Read the file. Okay, we're trying to reach, it goes through this public directory. It sees there's hello world 2.html. So I'm going to create an endpoint for that. And then I'm going to read this file content and send a response with the file content. So if I go to browser, you put hello 2, it's working. Any questions so far? I'm going to revert back to hello world while okay, I'll go on. Now this is all nice, but we so far have only served static things. That's not how the real world, the most popular thing to do with Express is. Today, modern apps, we typically send back information in another format that's called JSON. In the past, people used XML, but now it's more JSON. So how can we send information with JSON? Right? Why we do that? The reason we do that is usually we separate. Traditionally, we had every page that you visit when you click a link would reload or load a new page sent from the server. But that changed when they split the concerns between front end and back end, meaning we're going to separate the two apps. So we have an app that's only dedicated to the front end, to the browser side. And we have the app only for the back end. That's the server side that handles all the resource and information. So the client side would typically ask for information about a resource, and it expects to communicate via HTTP using plain text, but the format for the plain text is JSON. So let's learn how to do that here. So let's make an endpoint here. Let's say I want to access resource for products. I'm a shop or something, online store. So I'm going to say app.get and create a new endpoint. This route is for /products. And function is request res, the second argument. I need to send back products. Typically, you'll be an array of objects. So I can create products here, an array, and put some objects, give an ID, let's say string 1, and then name of the product, I don't know, table. And then let's make another one, ID 2, name, let's do chair, and so on. Basically, this is the representation of the products, a list of products. Each object has a unique identifier for that product, and there's a name. And it's in the real world, there'll be probably a lot more information, metadata about the product, dimensions, how much it costs, color, and so on and so on. Let's keep it simple, have only these here. And again, these would typically come from a database. So when you ask for a resource, what would happen here is usually you call on a database to retrieve that information. Since we don't have time for that right now, I just put it hard-coded in an object, array of objects. But typically that information would come from the backend, the database. So once we query the database, get the products array, we can finally send it back to the user. Simply say res.send and then products. And what's nice about Express, it understands you're going to send JSON, but usually it doesn't hurt to be explicit. It might not change the content type. So I always want to make sure that I say res set header or set content type to application/JSON. This is to tell the client, hey, we're sending JSON. Please interpret my response in the JSON format. Okay. And by default, the status code is 200. I didn't tell you how to change it, but if you want to be explicit, it's res status 200 like this. You can also chain this if you like. You can set, before you click send, you can set status 200 or any other status here like that. So chaining means first it sets the status to 200 and it returns the response itself so that you can call send on that again instead of having separate statements. Okay, and I think we're good to send that back. Let's watch /products in the browser. And we see this. Now, Firefox is nice to have this live JSON view. Let me see the raw data. The raw data is just text, right? There's no spaces because when you send responses, you want to save bandwidth. You don't want to send unnecessary space. But if I click pretty print here, I can see better visualize it. And Firefox has the JSON live view where I can expand each element in this array. Now, another way, if you're using another browser that doesn't have this, you can always press F12 or right-click Inspect to open the Dev Tools. Click Network, make sure the filter is all, and refresh. You're gonna monitor that response for product, and you click there. You can see more information. The verb, get, the endpoint, right, /products, at the status 200 OK, and so on. But you want to look at the response header. Remember, we set the content type. Content type application /JSON is here. Now, Express also adds this char set UTF-8, I think. And yeah, so if I look at the response tab, I can see if I click raw, this is the raw view. It's just plain text, 4-lane JSON. And if I uncheck raw, it's going to be the live view from the browser that makes it nice to expand things. But you get the point. So the client side, meaning the web application, like the shopping, catalog application would take this information and inject in the document to dynamically generate all the product information that you would see. Typically, product image with some information so people can click there and go to the product page. Any questions so far? Yeah, so when you're production, you don't want to use node.mon, so you probably want to do just node index.js. Simply can add a script here saying start :production or dash production, whatever. That would be just node index.js if you're curious. And then if you're in production, you just call npm run start :production. That way it doesn't keep restarting because of node.mon. Control C to kill that. Yeah, going back here to index.js, that's pretty much what Express does. You're just, servicing requests from the client side. Client asks for a resource, and then you try to find that resource, look in the database or elsewhere, or if it's some data processing that needs to be done, whatever it is, maybe you want to, process an image or audio, video, whatever it is, it would be done or called in queue to be done here, and eventually you send back to the user some response. And that's pretty much how it works. Of course, we don't write everything in a single file like I did here. We get really messy, right? In a real application, to have so many endpoints, maybe hundreds of them, and you want to separate them into different files and to better organize everything. Yeah, and with that, I think that's it for the introduction to Express.